responsible for the war, but the North was. So this isn't new in any way, shape, or form. We can see it in the 50s too, right? In terms of kind of the anti-communist fervor and controlling what is taught in school. So it's been ongoing forever since we had public education.
And I think that when we talk about choosing what to teach and how to debate this, there's always a interesting response in how much do you, as an educator, do you listen to the law, to obey, right? And follow the guidelines that are set in front of you, or do you teach the thing that you think you should teach because it's the right thing to teach? And that's a debate that each of us as educators have to have internally to say what's the right thing to teach. And it's challenging because in what you saw, I don't know if you saw this, the teacher of the year in Texas was in the middle of a lesson and she was reading through her text and she realized, she stopped in the middle and she realized that what she was about to teach was illegal in the state of Texas. And she stopped teaching and she walked out of her classroom and resigned because to follow the law meant that she would not be able to teach what she had to teach. And so that was her decision. Alternatively, she could have broken the law and kept teaching and allowed her students to learn that stuff that she was teaching. And each response has different power. Not to say one is better than the other, but there is, again, that political choice that is being made by that teacher, or by the teacher choosing to follow the law or to not. And that happens today. Looking for parallels, that happened in the 20s with Scopes, that happened earlier with decisions regarding the United Daughters of the Confederacy and how should history be taught, right? Yeah, it's not easy. That's what makes it really good, because this stuff is not easy.
I mean, I know he didn't want me to answer the question, but I do know a thing or two about history, and that's why I was invited on the panel, but it's fine.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You don't know me yet, it's all right. I think the only thing I just want to add on to what Dr. Boss said is that the teachers right now in Texas literally have standards that say you're supposed to teach this, and then have laws that say don't teach those standards. Like specifically say don't teach about X, Y, or Z, and they're like, but X, Y, and Z are in the standards. So teachers in Texas are really unethical. And so we talk about this, yeah, this is not new. This has been when somebody says, like, where did these wars kind of come from? It's like, it's just always been. Because even the UDC said, or at the turn of the century, well, last century, they said, you know, if we know that whoever controls the textbooks controls the narratives. And so when you look at textbooks that are actually digitized now, you can see what some of these history textbooks said that were authored or sponsored by the Daughters of the Confederacy, to see how they shaped the lost cause and how they shaped the narrative that would put the South in a good light. So this is not new. It's always been politicized. It's always been, I think we kind of go in with this idea of, I hope I don't have controversy, but like controversy follows us, people. This is social studies education, right? And so that's just kind of the way that it is. So get ready, but it's a heck of a lot of fun, I must say.
All right, I will get on to our second question. I was not asked either, but I will just
Solidarity, sister.
I will just add as the resident historian of science that the Scopes trial is also not the last time we've heard about creationism. About 20 years ago, there was a big case about intelligent design in Pennsylvania, which was a huge deal and very concerning for, like, at that point, someone who was an aspiring biologist. But so yeah.
Speaker of the House who's a creationist who wants to put it back.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, and it keeps coming back, and it's not just history. Education's powerful. All right.
My question has to do with, like, it's not like we're teaching like new topics. It's like things we've taught for years. And we're just now getting new information about it, so we're expanding on it. Why is it now becoming such a big deal these recent couple of years, where it's like, well, we can't teach this. Well, we've been teaching it for the last 50, 60 years. Why is it an issue now?
So there's this term that gets thrown around all the time called revisionist history. You've probably heard it on the news a couple of times. The problem, of course, with that is that all history is revisionist, right? As we grow and learn and get access to new sources, we change what we teach based on new information, right? And so I think that that's really the biggest problem, is that when you combine that belief that revisionist history is bad with this idea that we have to control the narrative, that it has to be positive all the time, I think that's really why we're in the situation that we're in now. It's not a function of, you're right, we've been teaching about slavery for.
But have we?
Yeah, I know.
But
That's
have
okay. Have we been doing it well? That's a different question, right? But I think that's why we are where we are. It's because it has become so political, and we want to control that narrative to make America seem exceptional all the time, right? We don't want to acknowledge those shortcomings. We don't want to acknowledge mistakes. We just want the happy narrative, and a lot of that comes out of the 1980s. But that's my opinion.
And with that coming out of the 1980s, that's where a lot of our politicians have come up from, right? And to think the schooling that they had that taught American exceptionalism, which is like, she was just saying that America has been great. It's the superpower. It's the best in the world. There's never going to be anything like it. And they can't make mistakes. And that's another component, that the United States has never made mistakes. And acknowledging those mistakes, sometimes people feel bad over, and politicians don't want to feel bad. They don't want students to feel bad. They don't want the acknowledgement that the United States has made mistakes. And so the term that's being used is, we don't want it to be divisive. That history is being divisive. The way it's being taught is being divisive. And if it's being taught and truth is being told, how it's being divisive, that's up to interpretation. That's not the same thing. That's non sequitur kind of thing. It doesn't seem to make sense. I think that as we continue on thinking about why is it such a big deal now, we have things like the 1619 project, which came out just a few years ago. Nicolana Jones published the 1619 project, and what it basically does is it recenters American history. It looks at American history through the lens of slavery, and it puts, instead of 1776 as the core year for the United States, it puts 1619 as the core year for the United States, which is the first year that Africans were brought over to the United States as enslaved persons. And that whole idea, partly because it was published by the New York Times and not in another academic text, that whole idea was really, I think, eye-opening for politicians. And us historians were like, yeah, this is no big deal. Many others have written this. Many others have done this work before. But because it was from the Times, it put it in front of people in a different way. And politicians read it, and decision makers read it, and could choose how to react, including including people deciding to be offended by it. How dare they change the teaching of American history, or change the understanding of American history to put it at 1619. And like you were saying before, we've been teaching about this stuff for a long time, but it changed. The 1619 project changed things because it made it much more of a popular discussion rather than keeping it in an academic setting, which made people upset. And partly, okay, that's all right. Being upset, being aware of how this needs to be taught, that's okay, as long as there's limited repercussions against us as professionals.
I'm gonna say, I think that the reason why it's becoming an issue right now is because of the tenor of the times. I think current events always informs what's happening in schools. And if I may just say that I think that anytime whiteness feels like blackness is making too much progress and somehow thinks that whiteness has been threatened, it will do whatever it can to stop the threat. And in this case, Nicole Hannah Jones is wildly successful, or at least getting a lot of attention for the 1619 project, which is getting all of this criticism from people that never read the dang thing. Because if you have a copy, which I do because I bought it at Starbucks that morning, it's like a little magazine. It's about yay big. It's kind of a hefty duty, like cardstock kind of cover. And it's full of essays. And all it did was propose this idea that maybe we should recenter history of it. That 1619 was important, that we don't talk about the importance of 1619. Most people did not even know what 1619 was. And she brought it into the narrative. And now everybody knows 1619 and probably at least associated with enslavement in some capacity. Now, whether or not they know it was the very first ship that arrived, I don't know, but she put it into the narrative. And that's really important. And so many people were criticizing it, acting like it was, were you using the 1619 project curriculum in your classroom or something like that? And I was like, it's a collection of essays. So before you start just attacking it, make sure you know what the heck it is, go read it. And so when I was working for a school district in central office and I had parents calling saying, are you using that? I would say, oh, which part of it did you not like? Oh, you didn't read it. Well, I tell you what, I can send it to you because it's a free PDF online. Why don't you read it and call me back? Nobody ever called me back. Because sometimes it's just about people don't know what something is, and then they critique it. And to Dr. Boss's point about teaching about race is not divisive. Racism is divisive. And when we can acknowledge that racism exists, and then we can start to get on a path towards reconciliation, then we're making some serious progress. But don't let people gaslight you into thinking that talking about race is bad, or that for you to do so in your classroom is bad, because educating people about racism is not divisive.
I'm gonna tag team one more thing on here. In my race and ethnicity class, which I teach them like every other semester, one of the things that we talk about from the beginning is that recognition is not blame, right? So this idea that politicians are worried about students feeling bad, that is not a problem for me, right? In any way, shape, or form. You're not gonna grow and learn unless we recognize and address those ills that we have been talking about. Sorry.
So with the idea of censoring parts of history, with looking at different countries that have historically done this, it seems to always end in backlash, or it ends in like a mass fighting. And is it the fact that they don't see that they're repeating it, or is it because they're censoring it, they can't see it?
Okay, that was a really big question. Number one, they censor because they know. Okay, you can't censor what you don't know. So if they're censoring, they know. Number two, we do it. We do it. That's what all these laws are all about, right? It's all about censoring curriculum. It's been a thing for all throughout American history, because people understand the power of an educated populace, and that democracy is dependent on an educated populace. So if you want to control the population, you control the education. So I don't think that, I think sometimes we can always say, oh, that over there, that nation over there, they're undemocratic. They control their education in a certain way, and we need to kind of shine the light inward and go, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, the idea of democracy being dependent on an educated populace is absolutely key, which is why we have public education to begin with, which is why we all are at a public institution. And controlling that narrative, which goes into the movement towards private education, the movement towards vouchers to get student dollars out to private schools to again control the education. That the terminology being thrown around today is government schools instead of public schools. That language is being inverted, which that's not right. Push back on that, because a public school is for the public rather than a government school and like being run by the government. It's like, come on. We as a democracy depend on an educated public, all of us together, being educated and as educated as possible, but also educated correctly with real knowledge, like full knowledge, including knowledge of mistakes we've made, which is why there's these attempts to control that narrative. Back to your question about why do they do it or what's the result? That's tricky. I mean, has it worked? Has censoring the media worked? or knowledge worked? And can it work anymore now in the age of the internet and the age of where we're at? I mean, there's a lot of assaults on our understanding and our knowledge. And then, of course, disinformation and, alternative facts and things like this that we have to, that you all get to struggle with as voters and participating in our public discourse, right? Our public conversations.
What is the most effective way to fight the history wars, in your opinion? Like, does it make sense to act like the Texas teacher did and just walk out and leave your students at the hands of someone who's going to follow the law and censorship? Or does it make sense to just fight and continue getting fired so that you can teach what you want to teach and what is correct?
This is the big deal. How do you teach? What's your responsibility as an educator, and how do you fight the history wars, right? And do you choose to get fired? Because there are lots of teachers who just want to keep the job and don't teach up to what they know they should be teaching. They teach according to their administration or the law or the district or the law instead of the standards or things like this. And again, that answer is up to the individual. I hate to say that. Sometimes that means choosing to go beyond your classroom that you're teaching in to then teach teachers how to go about it, which is why I chose what I did, so that I can have a little bit bigger impact after teaching high school, after teaching middle school and elementary school, to now be teaching here to say, okay, we need to have a bigger impact than what we did before. Maybe it means teaching those politicians why democracy depends on education, or having other ways to have a voice beyond just a classroom. Maybe it's a classroom plus, right? A classroom and being a lobbyist, a classroom and participating in your unions or the groups that represent teachers or others like that. Again, it depends on the person and how much you I don't know, feel obligated to fight that war.
I don't know that I would ever encourage them to quit their job. However, I think that every single person, especially historians, have to have a line. They have to have a set of principles that they fundamentally believe in and are unwilling to cross. When a lot of this discussion over things like critical race theory and that sort of stuff started, we had lots of conversations in this department. Dr. Gilly's chuckling because we had long conversations about this because I teach race and ethnicity, right? And so then the question was, at what point am I willing to change that class? And the answer is I'm not. So if that means that I lose my job at this point in my life, I'm okay with that, because I will not water down, change, undermine the things that I know to be true.
I got a list. Okay. Number 1, run for freaking office. Run for office. Okay, we have all these people making laws about what should be happening in your classroom, and none of them have ever been there, besides the fact that they were a student. And they think they can tell you how to do your job. Get your tush in there, go run for office. That may be your local school board. It doesn't have to be a congressional seat. Your local school boards, maybe you teach in one district, but you live in another district, go serve that district on their school board and make sure that nothing crazy happens with the curriculum. Secondly, you can't change the system if you're not in it. Okay, so if everybody who knows what's right and has principles and has convictions all jump ship, there's going to be a really big problem. So much like you, don't quit. Don't quit. Stay in there, fight. Good trouble, necessary trouble. Like, that is how things change. And you know what? There's a lot of us out there. So you think that, oh gosh, these teachers are just getting attacked and they're sitting back. They're not sitting back. They're forming organizations in their school districts. They're being really loud to their superintendent. to their school boards, they're like, bring it on, man. They're ready for it because they have conviction. Let me see what else I can. Oh yeah, vote. I'm gonna assume you all know, do that, go vote. Join professional organizations. Plug for the National Council for the Social Studies, of which I am the vice president. And so, as an organization, one of the reasons why I wanted to be a part of that is because I wanted to be a part of the conversation at the national level about what social studies education should look like. So now I am at that table that when USA Today and Wall Street Journal wants to talk to social studies experts, not that we're not, I'm just saying, they think we're gonna call in CSS and see what the people on that board think. And I get to be one of those people. So I'm like, I fought to get a seat at the table at like what I see as kind of like the highest, most influential level, because what we know is that states listen to NCSS. And then when the state creates their curriculum, then the local school districts listen to the state. And if we can influence the state curriculum, then we can influence the local level. And then lastly, be on committees. Your classroom is much bigger than the four walls. It's even bigger than the four walls of your school building. So I'm not even talking about committees in your school. I am talking about there are state committees for education happening all the time. And that's where I got my plug. I think I've been teaching for about 7 or 8 years. And somebody said, hey, do you want to be on the Social Studies Standards Revision Committee for the state of Missouri? And I'm like, I have no idea what that means, but yes. And so I started getting plugged in with teachers all over the state, and we wrote the freaking standards. And then when I moved, when my professional self moved over to the Kansas side, you know what I did? I picked up the phone, called the social studies guy at the Kansas State Department of Ed, and I said, hi, I'm Tina. You should know who I am. But what do you have available at the state level that I can serve? And I got plugged in right away. Guess what? State standards for the state of Kansas. And it's those kinds of tables where really big decisions are made that will absolutely impact your classroom. So don't think of yourself as only being in the four walls of your school, but how can you inform the profession on a larger scale?
I'm gonna add to that. So with that, that means when we are teaching, it's not just about the paycheck and not just about your commitment to your school or your school district. It means volunteering, and it means taking some time out of your regular life to be on those boards, to be on those committees, to be doing something else, to have that bigger impact, which means you're sacrificing some other parts of life, but you're gonna have that bigger, that bigger say.
I've never gotten paid for any of that.
Right.
Okay, just really, really quick. I'm not missing any hands in this side of the room.
I
am
haven't seen any.
Okay, I just wanted to make
This
sure.
one is on fire.
I know, they really want those t-shirts. But yeah, and by the way, if any of you ever, for whatever reason, end up teaching in the state of New York, they have exams in social studies, 2 of them that you have to take at the high school level, and teachers and former teachers write the questions. My mom has been one of them for the last 2 years. And it's not quite the standards, but like, you know, figuring out what the questions in the state test are is a big deal.
I wanted to know what we could do to address the role that parents play and in people who also fight these social studies wars, because I mean, as you said earlier, like a lot of the parents play a big role in like calling and being like, oh my god, I can't believe you're teaching this to my kid.
I don't do parents.
Okay. Okay, so just to remind you, I was a K-12 social, or I was, middle school and high school social studies teacher. And then I was a curriculum coordinator for a major school district in the Kansas City area, very large suburb. And we would get phone calls all the time that even if the superintendent couldn't answer and it was related to social studies, that it would come to me. And what I have found in my time is I think that when I was an early service teacher, I would get really scared if a parent questioned me. And I would be like, I feel like I'm on the defensive and I feel like it's me versus them. And I'm like 23 years old and they're like 50, and that's really intimidating. As I've gotten older, I've started to realize that sometimes the critique just means they would just want to be heard. And so sometimes if you just let them talk, that will squelch the whole thing. Number 2, educating the parents, because a lot of times they're ill-informed. So having the patience to see them as a student as well. And not being condescending, but just like talking through some things. And I think that lastly, kind of like what I was saying before, pose the questions back to them. What is it that you're against? Oh, are you in favor of enslavement? Well, no, no, no. Okay, so it sounds like we're on the same page here. So how can you find commonalities by instead of taking the question on yourself and feeling like you're getting really defensive, how can you create questions and pose them back to the parents? I remember when I was a high school history teacher, I had a parent call me who said, why are you teaching that the Civil War was about slavery? It was a states' rights issue. And I said, funny you say that. I've never said, even though it's totally about slavery, duh. But I never said that to the students at all. All I did was put the secession orders in front of the kids. And I said, what did Texas say is the reason why they left? What did Georgia say is the reason why it left? And you know what? The students said, oh, funny, first sentence, right to own slaves. Okay, well, they want to be enslavers and they just want to protect this institution of enslavement. And so I told the parent, I said, would you like me to send you a copy of the secession orders? We can chat about it. Well, sure, fine. I will send them to you and you can let me know what you think. Never heard back. When I got questions about CRT, I would say, hey, I'm happy to talk to you about this. What critical race theorists are you reading that you have a particular critique about? Crickets. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. How about this? What is a tenet of CRT you disagree with? Can we start there? Crickets. Okay, what exactly is your question? And then their question, I was like, oh, okay, well, that is about this. That actually is nothing about CRT. So it sounds like your criticism isn't about CRT at all. But you can really approach these things in a way that parents are partners with you, but you are still the degreed, certified expert in the field, okay? So don't give up your professionalism. Understand, I deserve to be here. I have a license, I have a degree, I know what I'm talking about, but you're welcome to talk. And I think engaging conversations, I also think that being on the front end of conversations with parents is really important too. Let them know, this is what we're going to talk about in the next month. And then that way they're not surprised when their kid comes home and says, hey guys, what we talked about this month.
I think there's a lot of current worry about groups like Moms for Liberty and some of the other parent groups, associated parent groups. And I think that with some of those groups, the issue isn't as much with the schools that their kids are at, but it's with schools in general, or the idea of education in general, public education or things like this. Just because somebody is a parent doesn't necessarily mean that they should have that voice in your school district. It like Tina was saying, like Dr. Ellsworth was saying, you're the certified teacher, you're the credentialed one, you're the one who has the degree. We get to rely on them. Right. And how much the board pays attention to that, or the school board pays attention to the parents, that's for a school board to determine. But for us as the professionals in the classroom, invite those parents in, have them part of that conversation, have them part of being educated, also teaching them. This is why it's so important also for our job, because sometimes that high school class or even that middle school class is the last history that that person's going to get, the last history class that they're going to get. And so they don't learn more than 8th grade social studies. That's not enough. But they're still empowered as being a parent to come in and ask questions or to challenge things. And so we've got to figure out ways to give them room and also acknowledge that they do have a voice. And then also to know that you're the credentialed one with the degrees behind you. We are, I mean, this is why this job is so important. By being educators, it's so important, and to do it right, to teach truth.
I want to piggyback real quick before we
You
go.
need
You need the microphone, Dr. Kelly, just a moment.
No.
So this is not just a K-12 issue. I'm the former chair of this department, and I got calls from your parents about what's happening here. So the conversation can actually start with you guys sharing your knowledge with your parents of what you're learning in your classes and opening those conversational doors with your younger siblings and with your own parents. Because it's this entire conversation, K-12 level, is filtering up to higher education. It's starting to shape and challenge, shall we say, what's happening on this campus. If you don't believe me, look at New College of Florida. That's right. So.
And if all else fails, you can remind them that FERPA and you're adults, so we don't have to talk to your parents.
That's right. Unless you find a way you're right.
Unless you sign away rights, but hey, it's one reason I'm not in K.
So obviously for the limitations of you guys, what you want to teach and stuff, is there a amount of pressure on you guys for that? But is also there a level of frustration with that? Because we're saying you can't teach this, you can't teach that. So is there frustration when it comes to that?
I guess there should be frustration. As I told my methods class, like, you just do what you feel like you need to do. I just, when I was teaching, so I used to be a high school teacher in California. We had a lot of questions, lots of struggles over social studies curriculum, things like that. And even though that there was discussion at the state level, and we knew there was pressure coming, until I was told otherwise directly, don't teach this, or you only can teach that, I'm gonna teach what I need to teach. Even though there's a feeling of pressure, I gotta do the right thing, which is be truthful in my class and teach my students as best I can. I won't say I was at the point of, it wasn't at the point of do this or lose your job. So I didn't feel that extreme level of pressure like Texas is facing, but there was definitely pressure about it, and you just gotta do the right thing. And I encourage my students to do the right thing and to teach what they need to teach. One more thing. Okay, so one of the things about it's teaching history, right? And a couple of years ago, we had Dr. Eric Foner come to campus, and he had a line that has stuck with me. And that is that historians are the enemy of the nation. The idea that what we say, not the enemy of the United States, that's not what I mean, but the enemy of imagined nations, imagined groups, to the white nationalist nation, right? The Christian nationalists who want to tell their story, their version of history, and or other groups who want their story told. And historians are in the crosshairs in some ways to say, we are willing to teach the right thing. We're willing to write about the right thing, to study the right things, even if those people don't like it. And it makes them frustrated, but that's okay. We're kind of stepping into this.
Yeah, I'm ticked off. Okay, super ticked off, and that's why people like me are like, you know, I'm gonna go do something about it. I'm gonna go serve on committees, and I'm gonna go serve at the state level, and I'm gonna go serve at the national level, because we can either sit there and take it and let things happen to us, or we can trust ourselves as the degreed professionals that we are to go out and shape the narrative and fight back. And the fight doesn't have to be nasty. It can be, you know what, I know that I serve on this state committee, and I have written state assessment items, and I have written model curriculum for the states that people then follow. And I'm not saying that in a braggadocious way. I'm saying that I saw myself as a professional, and I wanted to do more to impact the field in a bigger way. And I knew that if I could get into those bigger areas, I could make sure that the standards say what we need them to say to be able to do our jobs. And so I'm really proud of the work that we recently did in Kansas, because we don't have a single, this might make the historians mad, but we don't have a single standard that has content in it. Not one. All of them are about continuity and change over time, the interactions of people, choices having consequences, which I love. Because then you can teach any topic whatsoever, and you can say, hey, enslavement, choices have consequences. Hey, LGBTQ rights movement, choices have consequences. People come together and bring about change. And then our entire state assessment is centered, which we just redesigned, really proud of that too, is centered around argumentation. So it's not about content knowledge. It's about, can you make a claim? Can you use evidence and can you connect it with reason, no matter what the topic is? So as the state, we decided, how can we back off and let it be more inquiry driven and give the teacher more agency? So now they're not confined by, well, like in Missouri, when you've got these really specific objectives, then somebody could say, if you go outside of these objectives, you're somehow violating the rules. I argue that standards are a minimum. As long as I hit those, who cares if I go over? That was always kind of my philosophy. But there's also a lot of standards, even in Missouri, that say, are you using primary and secondary sources? Are you using the tools of inquiry? Are kids asking questions? Are they able to use claim evidence and reasoning? And you can still tie that to just about any content area. But whatever the standards say can also give you a heck of a lot of freedom. And so fighting to get at that, because I was mad, I fought to get at those places so that way we can make some positive change.
All right, I'll be right there. I am gonna use privilege of the microphone. And again, I have only taught at the college level, so I've not received pushback from parents, but I've received pushback from students
Yes.
about what I teach on occasion. And I will say my first year as a teacher getting that, or as a professor, I was terrified. You all don't know how scary it can be. But like, I was right out of my PhD, I was 28 years old, and it was really sort of, I got shook. But you kind of have to pick yourself up and remind yourself, like, yeah, I'm the expert, I'm doing this for a reason. And I was in a different institution at that point, but you know, going to colleagues and like showing them this paper and being like, I'm not out of line, like this isn't crazy, right? And you know, having having peer mentors is something that you should foster, regardless of whether you're an education major or social studies or something completely different. Like finding the people who are going to support you is really, really important. But I just wanted to note that like it's okay to be really scared by the parents or the students at first. Just don't let it stop you.
And I don't necessarily want to speak for them, but something tells me that they would agree with this. And that is, when you leave here, you can still call us. When you leave here, if you have something that comes up, you call us. You're like, Ellsworth, I've never had you in class. I just met you at Valk. Yeah, you could call me too. I'll help you. So whatever you need, just holler.
Is there ever conflict between like admin trying to restrict things that aren't necessarily restricted by state or board? And if so, does it put your job in as much jeopardy if it's just at the admin level?
That's a great question. You hope it wouldn't happen, but inevitably, some admin, they have their own background. They're bringing it into their own classroom, and some administrators have been history teachers or have a background in social studies and have a strong belief in their way that they see what you do. And they weigh in heavily, maybe not necessarily to the point of threatening a job, because that's not the only consequence that could be out there. There are other consequences. You know, you don't get to teach it the way you want to. You don't get to offer the course that you want to in the way that you want to, the way that you think that the trend has been moving and that you want classes to be offered, or you have this opening and admin says, I don't think it should be taught that way. I'm not gonna let you take that or offer that class. So it's possible to get pushback like that. I wish it didn't happen. It does. And so times like that, especially with offering a class, you don't get a say because that class just isn't available. You can keep rattling the cage or ratchet it up to a school board or something like that, but sometimes it's sticking through it with that administrator, or sometimes it means, we were talking about this earlier, what's the line when you decide to quit a job, to struggle over how much do you fight against administration, or how much do you struggle with that same administrator and hope that things get better. And each of us have a different set of lines, like Turnus was just saying, here's the absolute line for me. Each of us are a little different on that. So I wish it didn't happen. It does happen. And we get to figure out what matters to each of us to determine our lines.
So I actually have a story about that, not about his teaching history content, but about, disagreements with administration over discipline. In 2007 and 2008, I taught, at this thing called the Southeast Educational Cooperative in Arkansas. And so we taught via interactive TV, think like early Zoom, okay? And I taught for 54 different high schools and 17 different colleges, okay? Super weird situation. Anyway, so in the first 6 weeks that I was there, I had a group of students who were, who had already signed to play football at the University of Arkansas, so they were seniors. And I caught them cheating on their exam on TV, which was super weird, right? So after that happened, I of course called the school because I'm not in the school, right? I'm in the cooperative, they're like 30 miles away. I called the school and I said, hey, we have a problem. So the principal went down, right? He stopped him from taking it, he ended the test and whatever. So then I was asked what the consequence was, and my response was they failed the test, right? And then there will be more oversight, and then we'll move on. End of story, right? No, this is Arkansas. In Arkansas, they still had corporal punishment in school. So the principal wanted me to have them paddled. If you don't know what that is, okay, think wooden paddle with holes in it. Yes, so that it stings when they whack you with it, okay? I'm a parent, I don't hit my kids. I'm not gonna hit somebody else's kid because the thing is, it was that I had to do it. And I was absolutely 100% never in a million years going to do that. So we fought for weeks about this, as you might imagine. We ended up, the students failed their test. They still passed the class. I mean, it was just one test out of a whole year. It really wasn't that big a deal. They were seniors. Yeah, it's the yeah. Yeah. Anyway, at the end of that year, I quit that job. Wanna guess why? Because that happened more than once, and I fundamentally was unwilling, right, to participate in corporal punishment, and I moved back here. So it's not just history teaching that's gonna get you in trouble with administration. There's lots of things, right, that can happen. You have a paddling story too?
I don't have a paddling
story.
Tell me more about that later. Oh my God.
Horrifying.
That is horrifying. So, in my experience, I haven't seen administrators just show up one day and say, stop teaching that. It's always been because a parent has called first. And they're being responsive to a parent. And a lot of times, I think that administrators try so hard to keep the peace that their knee-jerk reaction is always just stop it, just make it stop. And unfortunately for them, I was the teacher. Especially now, if I had a principal that was a social studies teacher, super easy. Hardly ever did they push back on anything that we did. Back to what you were saying. But for the ones that did not have a social studies ed background, I was like, oh, you're not coming to me. Because I will sit there and I will tell you all the reasons why I'm going to continue to do this. And so part of it is educating the administrators. So they're a partner with you too. But you don't have to take everything. They're going to talk to you like this is not an option. It's always an option, right? And you can always say, if they say, Tina, I really need you to stop doing that. I'm going to be like, let me talk to you about that. Let me tell you what I did. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you why I think that that's important. And then they're like, oh, because they haven't heard the other side, and there's always more than two sides. They've heard an angry parent who didn't have all the information, but they haven't heard me. And so if a principal came to me and they didn't ask me, you know what happened in class yesterday? And they came at me just saying, you can't do that anymore. I was like, oh no, I'm not going down that easy. So it's okay. Like if they come at you and say they don't want you to do that, but just have a professional conversation with them. Because again, you are a degree professional. This is your content area. This is your classroom. This is your conviction. So you tell them this is how it aligns to the standards. This is how it's going to protect our democracy. And I've never, in my experience, I've never had anybody be like, no, you really can't keep doing that. They were like, oh, good point. I'll go talk to the parent about that. And didn't hear about it.
Any other questions? I got one to finish up if no one else has something. Since
There's still t-shirts left.
I know
There's three.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes, excellent.
representing the right side. Left side.
Maroon or black?
What do you think a bigger issue is? The students getting a lack of knowledge in high school? Or them trying to control what teachers are teaching?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so you're asking whether the bigger issue is basically what's being taught at the high school level or the laws that are being passed. Was that what you're asking? I don't think you can separate those two. I think that I think the majority of teachers in America want to do a good job. I think that they want their students to leave school well prepared for college or life to be a citizen. But when politicians pass laws that impact what is approved for teaching, it makes it almost impossible for them to do their jobs unless they break that law. Yes, everybody agrees with me. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
You can separate the two.
I'm gonna save this comment for later.
Any other takers?
I'm curious how many of you are going into social studies ed? Okay. Best profession ever, we're still recruiting.
Yeah.
Come on over. You're like, you scared us. No,
There are jobs.
there are jobs.
So many jobs, that's true.
Like everyone.
Yes.
Can I just speak to the teachers for just a second? I'm gonna say my comment there, right? Teachers, if you did not have a lot of power and influence in the role as a teacher, they wouldn't be making laws to regulate it. Okay? That's how important your job is. That's the kind of difference you can make in society. It's so important that politicians are trying to stop you. Don't let them.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, we can all leave now.
I mean, we are at about time, so we can call it. And for those of you who are not social studies ed, and you should seriously consider it, if not that, just hang out with us in regular history. But for those of you who aren't, this is important for all of us, right? Because it's about our democracy and our society. And I really love something that John Green put on YouTube a very long time ago, because I'm old. I know, but this was before he had kids.
Okay.
This is a while ago.
Fair.
Where he said, I am happy to pay taxes to fund public education, even though at that point he did not have a child in public education. And I will say, as someone who does not have any children at all, I am happy that part of my earnings goes to taxes that help fund public education. Because, like John Green, I want to live in a civilized country that is not full of stupid people.
Amen.
So, anyhow, good night, everybody. Education's important. Think about all of this.
Thank you.
And our next Ask Valk Anything will be November 9th, and we will be talking about the Israel-Hamas war.
Oh, yes, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, great. I taught in Harrison Mill, and then I was in K-12 for teachers. I still didn't believe that.
That's a good question.
Yes, I'm very good.
I live in Flat City right now. So I've got 10 cities.